The world of MMA and combat sports is ripe with wild stories, but this one is definitely one of the craziest and is one that most people know nothing about. This is the curious case of Phil Baroni, which involves a murdered woman, Mexican cartels, corrupt police, and a hot-headed former UFC fighter with CTE and an alcohol addiction. But first, for those who don't know, let's take a look at who Phil Baroni is. Phil Baroni competed in MMA during what some might call the dark ages of the sport. It was back when MMA was still considered to be very violent and it didn't have the kind of regulations and fan following it has today. So most people may not know about him today, but Phil was quite popular at his time. He fought in almost every major MMA promotion from Pride, Elite XC, and Strikeforce to the UFC, Bellator, and One Championship. He had fights with major stars like Frank Shamrock and put on some really exciting fights across different promotions. Baroni's fan base was quite polarized. Some people loved him and some hated him, but one thing they could all be certain of was that when you watched a Phil Baroni fight, you're gonna get a show. Either Phil was gonna knock out his opponent or he might get knocked out himself. And if not that, he might attack a referee or pick a fight outside the cage, Khabib style. Whatever the case, Baroni made you want to tune in to watch his fights. Phil was known as somewhat of a hothead. In fact, several people who knew him or even lived with him said that he had quite a temper. His former roommate and friend, Josh Thompson, talked about his anger issues on a podcast with John McCarthy, saying that it was hard to know what he would do. One second he was hugging you and pumping you up, and the next he might try to fight you. Add to that a long MMA career and the head trauma that comes with it, and you can see how quickly things can go bad. So let's move up to January of last year, when Phil was 46 years old, long retired from MMA, and on a vacation in Mexico. He was with his girlfriend Paula and was staying at a small hotel. Apparently, according to the reports from the local authorities, Phil ended up assaulting and murdering Paula, who was the mother of 2 young kids. Phil and Paula were meeting at a hotel in San Pancho when this awful incident occurred. Paula had just admitted to cheating on Phil, and from what we know about his personality, you can imagine how he took it. Phil was understandably quite emotional. However, the way he chose to express his emotions was quite crazy to say the least. In the report he gave to the local authorities after the incident, Phil said that he told Paula to take a bath, and when she refused, pushed her into the shower, where she hit her head, fell down, hitting her head on the floor again. Phil said that he then helped her up and took her to the bed, where he took off her clothes and covered her with a sheet after she told him she was cold. He claimed that Paula then asked him to get her cigars and beer, and when he returned, she wouldn't wake up. He then ran to grab the police who were standing outside the hotel and told them his girlfriend was unresponsive. However, when the police looked at the body and talked to Phil, they believed that there was more to the story that he was hiding. Paula's body was bruised and battered at multiple spots, and the police also believed that Phil was drunk and high on marijuana. His knuckles were also bruised, which was enough evidence for the police to arrest him on the spot. The news of Baroni murdering his girlfriend may have come as a shock to many, but to the people who actually knew him, not so much. In fact, this wasn't the first time Phil had gotten into trouble because of his temper. Apparently, the reason Phil was in Mexico in the first place was that he was fleeing similar charges in his home state of New York. Not murder, of course, but he was facing charges of stalking and physically assaulting his ex-girlfriend. Moreover, when the hearings for the Mexico murder case started, Paula's sister testified that she had seen bruises and other signs of assault on Paula in the past as well. She also said that when the family told Paula to leave Phil and go to the authorities, she hesitated because she feared a violent reaction. Overall, for many people who knew Phil and spent time with him during training camps and everyday life, the news of him murdering his girlfriend didn't come as much of a shock. Phil was immediately arrested after the incident. You've already heard this side of the story, but according to the authorities in Mexico, the autopsy report of the victim revealed a different account. It showed a harrowing truth that makes any sane person disgusted and puts Phil and his actions in a much more sinister and dark light. While researching this story, I came across a very interesting episode of the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins podcast. Where the MMA detective, Mike Davis, discussed the Phil Baroni case in detail, it made some astonishing claims. Mike Davis is a widely trusted MMA journalist who actually lived in Mexico, specifically in the area where the murder happened. He has a lot of friends in the area who helped him dig deep down the rabbit hole and reveal some insane truths. According to the autopsy report of the incident, Paola had a lot of bruises and damage all over her body and even her private parts, which led authorities to believe that she might have actually been sexually assaulted as well, likely after she was dead. Here's what Mike Davis said on the podcast.
She tells me, yeah, man, you got to read the autopsy report. There's damage to her body, including her private areas, that make them think something took place after she died.
In today's post-truth age, it has become extremely difficult to separate facts from emotions. The truth gets buried deep in conflicting stories to the point that you can't be certain what to believe. Well, the same happened with this incident. Through the evidence and Phil's personality, combined with his heavy use of alcohol and drugs, does make it seem like he probably did it, but Baroni still claims that he is innocent. Add to that the known corruption stories of Mexican police and the heavy influence of drug cartels on the Mexican justice system. You don't know whose side to trust. There was an interesting video put out by John Ali around this time the incident happened, in which he claims to have talked to Phil from prison. He said that Phil claimed to be innocent and that he believed him. Phil claimed that the entire incident was an accident, and when he left his girlfriend to get some supplies, someone entered his hotel room and killed his girlfriend. Though John Ali removed the video from this channel, I did find some clips of what he had to say. One of the things that John Ali said in this video is that Phil did not flee the scene to try to hide any evidence. Instead, he actually found the police himself and informed them of the situation. He repeatedly asked why he would do that if he was guilty. Well, I don't have an exact answer to that, but it does seem like a person who is drunk, high on drugs, and known to have anger issues could possibly panic and try to get ahead of the situation by going to the police first. On the other hand, there were things about Phil's past that added to the conspiracies about this incident. You see, Phil Baroni's father was a prominent member of the Gambino crime family in New York. During his youth, Phil himself briefly dabbled in the underworld.
Scores with me, got involved in robberies with me as a young man.
Of course, as most people know, the crime families in New York aren't that friendly with the Mexican cartel. Certain voices even suggested that Baroni was framed due to his and his father's criminal affiliations. Yet, personally, I find this a bit far-fetched. Regardless of whose side you believe, one thing is certain. This is an awful and devastating story. It is just a nightmare of a situation for everyone from the victim and her family to Phil himself. Whether Phil did it or not, Paola, the victim, did not deserve to be assaulted and killed like this. Her two kids did not deserve to be left without a mother. Also, Phil couldn't have chosen a worse place to mess up in. In a place like Mexico, it doesn't really matter if he actually killed the girl or not. He is a foreigner who doesn't speak the local language and is stuck in a system run by ruthless drug lords and murderers. To make things worse, there is no way that he will actually get a speedy trial and will probably have to spend years in prison before his case is even heard. To make matters worse, a Mexican prison is a bad place for anyone, let alone a foreign fighter who is accused of killing and sexually assaulting a local woman who is a mother of two kids. Such people don't last long in cartel-run prisons, and with Phil's aggressive personality, you can be certain that he will get himself into some bad situations. In fact, according to the MMA detective Mike Davis, Phil was even beaten up in prison, and you may expect that he would get in trouble with other inmates, but it was actually the guards who beat him up. A few months after the incident, Phil's longtime friend and manager, Matthew Granahan, came out with a crucial update about Phil's situation. He said that Phil's family and friends got together and came up with a lot of money, 6 figures according to Matthew. They then paid this money to the cartel and had Phil move to a halfway house run by the cartel. Things got somewhat easier for him here as he didn't have to deal with a lot of violence. He could train, get alcohol, drugs, and women as well. However, dealing with the Mexican cartel is not easy. Matthew Granahan also said that Phil did some drugs with a call girl in the halfway house, which members of the cartel filmed and used to extort his family for more money. Overall, this is a very tragic story. It is extremely confusing and you don't know who to believe. But despite all that, there is still a victim There's a girl who got assaulted and killed, and there are kids who are left with a broken family. Phil is a hard character to sympathize with, but still, you can't help but feel a little bit sorry for him. Regardless of whether he did it or not, he deserves a fair trial, but as things have unfolded, it doesn't seem like that is going to happen. So let us know what you think about this situation. Personally, I feel like he might have done it, but the thought of being in a Mexican prison scares me. I don't know. We'll see what happens with him. Comment down below what you think and what you thought of the video. Thank you guys for watching.